And the game award goes to Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
And the game award goes to Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
And the game award goes to Laureat Testa.
And the game award goes to
Claire Obscure
Expedition.
If you were present in the online gaming scene circa December 2025, I'm sure you can recall this moment as well. Thousands of people celebrating the record-breaking run Claire Obscure Expedition 33 just went on at the 2025 Game Awards, and thousands more asking what just happened and why. Me, personally, I didn't have a stake in the race that year. The only games I played that released in 2025 were Dispatch, Split Fiction, and Peak, all of them with a seal of I had fun, but it wasn't anything groundbreaking approval. I was busy playing Devil May Cry 2. But as I watched the show and saw people dogpiling this game I'd heard of like once or twice, I kinda started to feel bad. Come on guys, these speeches are so sweet. This whole "for those who come after" thing is a really nice tagline for your game to have. You probably just hate it because it's an RPG. Now, as I'm sure is clear by the last 2 scripted videos I made on here, I like a good RPG. So in spite of what I was seeing on Twitter, I went to the Steam page, realized it was already in my Steam family for some reason, hit download, and got ready to play what I was expecting to be a good-ass game. What I got instead was a regurgitation of several different games I'd already played, with a story that wasn't even on par with its contemporaries. I have no idea how this game got so popular. I have no idea what people are seeing in it that I'm not. I'm hoping that in making this I can at least put my thoughts in order. A product of 33 hours of my life that I'm not getting back. So, unlike Persona or Yakuza, Claire Obscure isn't really like a series or anything. Brainchild of one Guillaume Broche sometime in 2019, the disgruntled ex-Ubisoft employee was just kinda bored. Inspired by RPGs like Final Fantasy, Suikoden, Atelier, Shin Megami Tensei, etc, 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 what started as a solo passion project quickly grew in size as he got more and more people interested, both through industry connections and through the power of the internet. One of the funnier development stories involves lead writer Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, who saw a humble little call for voice actors Guillaume posted on Reddit. She decided to send an audition and was originally going to play a major role in the game, but settled into being the lead writer eventually. Similarly, the main composer of the score, Lorien Testard, was hired thanks to Guillaume being a fan of the music that he posted on SoundCloud, and the game's art director, Nicolas Maxon Franchomme, got the job thanks to the work on his ArtStation. Despite this very off-the-wall style of forming a team, it worked surprisingly well, with Guillaume citing both COVID and his, quote, massive luck as to why he could get away with this. Starting with about 6 members, the newly formed Sandfall Interactive only grew in size as development continued on their strange little project. Starting life as Project W, a steampunk RPG in Victorian England, it's not like this game had a lot of fanfare, or frankly, really anything going for it. It had a very small following online, and with Guillaume saying that a potential release was as long as 3 to 4 years away, I can't imagine anyone was holding their breath for this. However, Sandfall did persevere, working with various contractors under the new safety of their publisher Kepler Interactive. They were able to keep a steady pace working on the game. As a side note, a common point of praise for this game is how small its budget of $10 million is, which is just kind of funny that I'm supposed to think that's a small number. At this point, Expedition 33 as we have come to know it became more and more real, ditching England for their homeland of France and replacing Victorian-era steampunk with the Belle Epoque-era high fantasy style the final product adopts. Nearing release, thanks to trailers published by big companies like PlayStation themselves, the game certainly caught the attention of a lot of people, both with its use of Unreal Engine 5 and its flashy art direction, but also because it's French. And that's funny, I guess. Put a pin in that. At long last, Claire Obscure Expedition 33 launched on April 24th, 2025, to some of the most insane review scores I've personally ever seen from an original IP. Selling millions basically in the blink of an eye, it was enough to get them a pat on the back from the president of France. Enter me. Sorry Sandfall, it's nothing personal. You all seem like very nice people and I respect what you managed to do as a studio in this day and age, but I don't get it. How did this game even get so popular? A worthwhile and engaging opening is a pretty hard balancing act for a story-heavy RPG. While it does have to take its time to properly set up any crucial plot beats it has to, it also do well not to bore you to death in the first 2 hours lest you go back to Yoshi's Cookie.
Why did he teleport back?
Why the fuck? For as much grief as I give the rest of the game, I think Persona 5 is a great example of an effective opener. Robbing a casino as a flamboyant guy in a weird costume is a great, quick way to introduce us to the Phantom Thieves, what they do, and why that might be a problem for us now that we're getting chokeslammed by the police. Skies of Arcadia also jumps to mind as a game with a great opener. The title crawl teaches you about air pirates, and within 5 minutes of hitting new game, you're already raiding a royal ship in search for anything valuable. All this to say, I think Expedition 33's prologue is actually quite elegant in the way it presents its information. It's easy to piece together what the expeditions are for, given the giant lady with the 34 in the horizon, and the melancholy that permeates the conversations Gustave and Sophie are having set the tone well for when the 34 ticks down to a 33 and she becomes flowers. There's a ton of people to talk to and stuff to interact with, which I find very admirable, even if it doesn't really amount to anything. I think the city of Lumiere is kind of a hard sell, so giving you lots of things to divert your attention to was a great choice. A sort of reoccurring note, though, was that on my first playthrough, I was hooked by this prologue, not even necessarily for any of the things I just mentioned, but because it reminded me of a game I already liked. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has a pretty similar structure to this. Gustave is Noah, Sophie is Mio, the Gamage is Homecoming, and instead of shedding exactly one Unreal Engine tear, he does his iconic Noah scream. I didn't think too much of it, though, because I thought it was clearly going somewhere else with its themes of grief. Sophie speaks about how she loves her children so much she doesn't want to bring them into a world with a Gamage taking their life away. This paired with the "for those who come after" thing I thought made grounds for a story that would have something to say about nihilism and finding meaning in a life filled with hardships. I thought that would be a very poignant message to put in your game in this day and age. A lot of this momentum sort of falters when you get to the docks, though. The only real purpose of this scene is to make you mingle with the rest of the expedition before all but 4 of you get turned into mist, but it's not like any of these characters are all that interesting. There's this NPC you can talk to that quizzes you on the history of the world, and it's right about here where I started being weary on what was to come. This is one of the clunkiest ways a story can do world building. Gustave is the leader of Expedition 33. Every character you talk to praises you for your invention of the Lumina converter, whatever that is. When you answer the question this guy gives you, Gustave literally calls it a stupid question for babies. Even worse is that when he asks you what Lumina is, the answer is abilities you internalize by using a Pictos in battle. What the hell is a Pictos? Defining your fantasy concept with another made-up word for a different system in your world is shockingly amateur for a game I played because it won record-breaking amounts of awards. Maëlle and Gustave quickly become the only 2 characters that matter, given that they explicitly tell you that they're family, paired with the fact that she gives you the combat tutorial and a rematch. When you get to shore and all these other randos start getting slaughtered one after the other, it feels less like a shocking loss and more like they had to trim the cast down as fast as possible. It's especially funny when you get farther in the first area and you see other corpses of Expeditioners strewn about, like Old Man Renor looked at Expedition 33 and decided they had to die immediately. The prologue ends with Gustave getting his own little title card, and for the most part, the real game begins. The problem that rears its head is that now you actually have to play Expedition 33. This may come as a surprise, but when I play an RPG, I'm actually mostly coming to it for the gameplay. It's not like I ignore the story or anything, but I want what I'm going to be doing for about 70% of this thing's runtime to be fun, or at least interesting. And honestly, I'm not that hard to please. I absolutely adore Yakuza Like a Dragon, and while a good chunk of it is due to its stellar writing, I also had a fun time playing the game despite how unbalanced it was. Was it a complete mess about half the time? Yes. Did I beat Final True Millennium Tower? Also yes. I wouldn't say I'm a purist or anything either, but I'm someone who never quite understood people who call turn-based RPGs slow or passive. That's like the fun part. To me, the turn-based RPG is fun when I get to look at my situation, look at my toolbox, think, and act accordingly. I love the back and forth between me and the enemy. I act, they act, I react, etc. It's not like every game is chess or anything, but I feel like being methodical is a big aspect as to why people like me love the genre. This is in contrast to an action game like, I don't know, totally random example here, Dark Souls. The fun of Dark Souls comes from thinking on my feet and reacting not to what the enemy just did, but to what they are currently doing. Expedition 33's reactive turn-based combat, as the Steam page calls it, tries to be both, and ultimately succeeds at neither. To be clear, I don't think acting during the enemy turn is inherently bad. There's an interview with Samfall co-founder Francois Maurice by RPG Site where he speaks on the influences from other RPGs that shaped the combat of the game. He states that, quote, "When Guillaume Broche came up with the reactive turn-based stuff, I was like, okay, you have to try Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. It has these kinds of dodge timing sequences, and it's actually one of my favorite games." Personally, I couldn't agree more. I played the Nintendo Switch remake of Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door around 2024, and I was floored by how simple yet effective its combat was. When an enemy attacks in Thousand Year Door, you have three options: take the hit, guard it, or if you're feeling confident, super guard it. The reason why this works is both thanks to the Thousand Year Door's overall low numbers, and also because they're defensive options first and foremost. The guard has a window of 8 frames. It's not that hard to hit if you just eyeball it, and all it does is reduce the damage of the incoming attack by 1 hit point, which is a lot in Paper Mario terms, but certainly not enough to fully negate damage later on in the game. On the contrary, the main benefit of the Super Guard is that it fully negates the damage of an incoming attack, with the added benefit that it does exactly 1 point of damage to the enemy you Super Guarded against. The main idea to take into consideration here is that the 1 point of damage dealt isn't the draw of the Super Guard, its primary benefit is that you're negating the damage being dealt to you. Compare this to Expedition 33's option during an enemy attack. You have pretty similar options on paper: tank it, dodge, or parry. The problems start becoming apparent when there's no real reason to consider dodging. The parry and the dodge both do the same thing as a defensive option. They both completely negate the damage dealt by the enemy. The difference is that while a dodge only does that, the parry is an inherently offensive option. Not only does it give you mana per hit parried, it also triggers a very powerful counterattack if all hits are successfully countered. While the dodge window is more forgiving, the amount of damage and mana you're giving up by not going for a parry instead is actively shooting yourself in the foot. On higher difficulties, tanking hits is often not an option either, as a lot of attacks are either long multi-hits or just one-shot you outright unless you build specifically for defense, which is a lot easier said than done. To add insult to injury, the average enemy attack pattern in this game is amazingly unintuitive to predict and parry accordingly. Let's start with some enemies I actually have few complaints with. Enemies in the final area kind of hilariously named Claire and Obscure. When they attack, they charge up their swings, their swords light up as a visual telegraph, and they have a natural flow to their movements from when they begin their swing to when you're supposed to parry. There's only a couple attacks these enemies have that fall prey to the absolute worst tendencies of this game: slowdown and fake-outs. On my first playthrough, I really started to make a note of this during the first boss you fight with a full party, Goblue. He has this attack where he jumps up and slams down on you 3 times in a row, the problem being that the timing for these hits are artificially altered due to the slowdown added to sell the strength of the hit. Notice how this attack plays out in motion. He jumps up, there's slowdown before he lands for the first time, he jumps back up and slams down again with no slowdown, and the third time he does it, there's slowdown again before the impact. How am I supposed to react to that? There is no natural flow to the way the attack is being presented. The delay between hits isn't coming from anything the enemy is doing rather than it just being an effect of the post-processing added to sell the impact of the hit. Notice as well how my expeditioners aren't affected by the slowdown. When I hit the parry button in anticipation of this hit in slow motion, I get hit anyway because the time slope doesn't affect the window of an effective parry. This is a problem that permeates attack patterns all throughout the game, including but not limited to the final boss. When you fight Renoir, he has this attack where he attacks frenetically, and it's kind of a golden example of what I'm talking about. The first hit has slowdown, the second doesn't, the third does, the fourth, fifth, and sixth don't, the seventh does, and the eighth has a massive wind-up with no real tell when he comes down because it's all in slow motion. In this clip, despite the fact that I parried 4 of his 8 swings, I still took about 40% of my max health even with a buff that reduces incoming damage by 20%. When I commit to a parry by predicting the movement of the enemy, I'm punished anyway because I don't account for the slowdown that may or may not even be there. This brings me to a larger issue that enemy telegraphs in this game are generally very unclear. Let's take Dueliste for example. He has an attack where he summons Stormblood, whatever that means, does a little flourish, and you have exactly 1 second to react to these blood apparitions that have the same color scheme as the rest of the arena, while you're likely looking at Dueliste himself for his cue. Check out this attack from the Renor Fed I was just talking about. The tooltip says that he attacks, it gives me a prompt to jump over whatever the hell this motion is supposed to convey, and when he does the exact same thing in the other direction, it of course means that miscellaneous magic explodes in front of him and that I needed to parry. In this clip, I lost a third of my health for simply not remembering what that attack did beforehand. Again, compare this to the spinning attack that Claire does. It has a slow windup, and even though I get hit and eat shit in this clip, it doesn't feel unfair because the motion of the attack was well communicated to me in the animation. It also doesn't help that the tooltips when an enemy attacks, kind of suck half the time. Some of them are fine, like when it says they're gonna do a 3-hit attack and they do a 3-hit attack, but some of them range from not helpful at all to straight up wrong. What does a tricky shot with its trumpet mean? A projectile? No, it just sorta means it's gonna drag the trumpet across the floor and smack me with it. The dark creature roars, of course, means that it doesn't roar at all, and it just spits a projectile at you with 0 delay. Look at me in the eyes and tell me that what Patank is doing here counts as a melee attack literally at all. In this clip I parried early because I thought he was gonna roll into me, I don't know, do something, not spew what is by definition a projectile. Catapults thunder thingies. Okay, this one isn't wrong, they are in fact catapulting thunder thingies at you, but when else am I gonna get to bring up catapults thunder thingies? All of this combined with a rampant slowdown creates a mechanic that pretends it's about reaction when it's actually about memorization, a cue taken from Dark Souls. The difference is that in Dark Souls you can literally back up and wait it out. Parrying isn't even a necessary mechanic. I personally don't even do builds with shields because I find them less fun. Shoving gameplay like this into a turn-based format shows a fundamental misunderstanding as to why these mechanics in Dark Souls actually work. Expedition 33 punishes you for not knowing the attack patterns as if you had the option to not engage and observe. There's a quote I think about a lot from Guillaume Broche when he did an interview with Japanese games outlet Denfaminico Gamer, where he speaks about the main philosophy of designing fights in Expedition 33. He explains that, quote, traditional turn-based RPGs feature a plethora of mechanics, such as status effects, buffs, and debuffs. During the design phase, we first considered, can a boss using this mechanic be defeated without taking any damage? If the answer was no, we didn't use that mechanic in the first place. To me, this shows a clear disregard for what makes a turn-based RPG a turn-based RPG. The entire existence of an enemy hinging on whether or not it can be beaten without taking any damage prioritizes dodges and parries above all else, doubling down on the reactive part of reactive turn-based combat. Moving on from defense and focusing on the offense, it's amazing oh shit, we're still talking about parrying. Both times I played the game, parrying was either straight up more effective or very much on par with my normal attacks I took on my turn. In this clip, my counterattack with 0 outside buffs does about 3 times the damage of my normal attack. Countering is by far the dominant strategy in the game, defensively and offensively, which makes each character's gimmick take a backseat. I would have loved the combat in this game if it fully committed to the character-specific abilities, but because parrying is so clearly the intended mode of play, they all feel unfocused. Expedition 33 wants to have its cake, and then take another cake and eat that one instead. Take Mael, for example. She's a stance switcher, and as someone who has always admired this archetype in fighting games, I was pumped when I saw this for the first time. She has her offensive stance, which increases damage dealt and damage taken, and her defensive stance, which takes less damage and grants 1 mana per dodge and parry. The problem then becomes that her third Virtuose stance becomes the clear winner out of the 3, granting a whopping 200% damage increase with no downside. All of the character gimmicks have a sort of ultimate goal like this that encourages doing the same thing over and over again when you have a strategy in place. Lune's elemental stains are cool and all, but her ultimate goal of achieving 4 stains and cashing them out for big damage isn't that hard when I have a weapon that generates 1 stain on a gunshot. Ciel's card mechanic doesn't reach its full potential as an engaging tool for me when I can stack cards, regain my mana, stack cards again, and cash it out for ridiculous damage every 4 turns with nothing to stop me other than death. Monaco's wheel would encourage mixing and matching different abilities if it weren't for the fact that the end goal is always to land on Almighty and get buffs for everything. Verso's perfection gimmick is actually the only one that doesn't fall prey to this because it has a set goal by design. I actually think perfection is a cool idea for a risk-reward playstyle if it weren't for the fact that the risk is completely negligible. And finally, Gustave. Well, his is incredibly half-baked because, You know, this leads to the offense, the defense, and the synergy of your team all feeling very disjointed. There's no reacting and adapting to what the enemy just did because you just parry it or you die. There's no real reason to synergize with your teammates when each character can work at full efficiency separate from everyone else. Speaking on balancing, something I haven't seen too many people touch on is the fact that up to a point, this game has a flat damage cap of 9,999. This sounds fine on paper, but it becomes problematic when— oh no, what's this footage of me hitting the damage cap halfway through Act 1 doing it? This game's numbers spiral out of control so drastically so fast, the damage cap acts as a pretty inelegant band-aid solution to a problem that they literally made up. Starting near the end of Act 1, the game starts doing an arms race with you. The more you get your characters to the pretty easy to hit damage cap, the more bloated HP pools become. By Act 2, bosses have health pools of up to 200,000 HP. Bosses aren't gaining health to scale to your power, as much as they are just gaining health to make the fights last longer. It gets to a point where the game itself completely stagnates in this regard because it knows your damage is bottlenecked. There's nothing you can do other than hit the damage cap every attack and every counterattack because you are no longer in control of your damage output. Late Act 2 combat is this game at its absolute worst. Just do the same thing over and over and over again, because it doesn't matter. Just hit the damage cap 30 times in a row until the boss's giant health pool disappears, and parry every attack because there's never any real danger. It's not until Act 3 starts when you get an upgrade that breaks the damage cap, where I personally went from 9,999 to 120,000? Are you Mind you, this was on my replay footage where I did little to no side content or anything. I wasn't over-leveled for this stuff. The only optimization I did here was let my party die so I get buffs for fighting solo, and just let counterattacks do all the damage. Expedition 33 not only allows, but straight up rewards me for playing like this, for not engaging with half of the combat system in favor of the shiny cool parry mechanic that betrays itself at every turn. Expedition 33 overall has a problem of taking gameplay concepts from things Sandfall liked, while not really understanding why they worked in the game they were taken from. Leveling up in Expedition 33 doesn't automatically allocate stats based on the character that is just leveled up, like every other RPG ever made. You have to go to what is essentially a bonfire and allocate these stats yourself. The problem I have with this is that it never really feels like putting my points in anything really changes my build or my playstyle. The only real impact this system has is letting me put more points into stats my weapons have more scalings for, yet another completely superfluous addition that only serves to bloat the damage numbers. Again, this isn't Dark Souls. This works in that series because you are role-playing as a specific character. All of these stats can make or break a build, and it's important to think about what you need right now versus what you want to invest into for later purposes. Expedition 33 only has like 5 stats, and by the end of the game, all of my characters become a homogeneous blob of the same stat spread because all of these stats matter for everyone. There's no strength versus dex versus intelligence versus faith, it's just might. Of course I want damage and health and speed and defense on everyone. This isn't a meaningful choice, and it just reads like they saw Dark Souls do it and decided that they wanted to do it as well. Furthermore, it's not like leveling up and allocating these stat points make a difference when most of your stats are actually coming from your equipment. In this clip, I have 32 points invested in defense, the most out of any other stat. The equipment I have is pretty low level, and give me some defense as a bonus stat for equipping them. The problem is that out of my total 432 defense, my equipment gives me 294 of those points. Roughly 70% of my most spec'd into stat isn't even coming from the points I allocated, but rather from a low-level equipment that I happen to throw on my L. This is so frustrating to me because the actually new ideas that Expedition 33 brings to the table are good, it just chooses to commit to the ideas that aren't theirs and the rest of the game suffers for it. Take the consumables for example. You have flasks that heal, revive, and give mana, and throughout the world there are these upgrades that increase your carry capacity and potency of these items. When you rest at a bonfire, these all refresh in your inventory, which I think is a great idea. I think this is a really good way to encourage the use of items in battle by voiding the fear of having to save them for later, while also giving a steady sense of progression as these items get stronger over time. In concept, I also quite like the Pictos and Lumina system and how they encourage experimentation and discovery through hands-on experience, but in practice, they don't fully commit to the bit. For example, I think it would have been cool if there were more than 2 whole Pictos that relate to dodging to try to give it any sort of real value. One of them is just a worse version of a different one you can equip but for parries instead, and the other gives you 1 mana once per turn if you hit a perfect dodge. You know, that thing with the same window as a parry? That thing that gives you 1 mana inherently? There are approximately 14 different Pictos that buff or at least augment your parry and counterattack in some way. Even when the game tries to do its own thing, it ultimately falls back to something it should know it doesn't excel at. I would have loved this game's combat if they doubled down on the turn-based and ditched the reactive in the state it's presented, but then I guess I wouldn't have been able to theoretically no-hit a boss. What a tragedy that would be. Thankfully, the turn-based battles of Expedition 33 are only about half the fight anyway. The real battle is trying to figure out how this game won Best Art Direction. In a pre-release interview with PlayStation Blog, Guillaume Broche speaks about how the visuals of Expedition 33 were a focal point in development. He states that, quote, "There hasn't really been any attempt at making a turn-based RPG with high-fidelity graphics for a good while, and that left a deep hole in my gamer heart. We took it upon ourselves to make something to fill that void." Putting aside the fact that this is straight up wrong, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is a high-fidelity turn-based RPG that came out not even half a year before this interview was conducted, and Baldur's Gate 3 literally won Game of the Year in 2023, I don't necessarily think this is a bad starting point for your project. I personally don't believe that high fidelity always comes at the cost of an effective art style, but it's unwise to just rely on your game looking technically impressive. I'm one of those really pretentious people that thinks Metal Gear Solid 3 looks significantly better than Metal Gear Solid Delta. It's not that the characters look worse in Delta, because they don't, but in focusing on realism they lost the striking color grading and lighting that made Metal Gear Solid 3 feel like the 80s spy thriller it was trying to be. Expedition 33 has very grand and technically impressive visuals, but that's all they amount to. Lumiere is less fantastical and mysterious as much as it is disjointed and aimless. The continent feels stitched together with no rhyme or reason as to why anything is the way that it is. The canon reasoning here is that everything is in the painting world, but that feels like a hand-wavy way to explain this. Take the first two areas for example. The first one is this pretty standard grass area, while the second one is this underwater but not really biome. What? Why? In the world map, there's no reason for Flying Waters to be where it is. It's visually impressive, sure, but it leaves me more with a sense of, I guess we doing circles now, than a meaningful sense of intrigue and wonder. When everything's floating and broken, it gets old really quick. Why are there floating half buildings around the Stonewave Cliffs? I literally don't know. The game never goes out of its way to explain why things are the way that they are, so my wow quickly turns to an okay, sure, when we get a random floating train station 3 levels later. Yeah, I mean, sure, we can do a random Indian architecture-inspired level in the middle of the ocean, who gives a flying fuck anymore? This type of world design is rampant throughout the entirety of Expedition 33, and it leads to the journey feeling less like you're crawling your way north to the monolith and more like you're stopping to sightsee every 20 minutes. It's especially funny when you find a side area in the overworld and it's not even a level. It's literally just a static camera in a random location with one item to collect. What exactly am I exploring here? All of this leads to a serious problem this game has with visual clarity, and how, among other things, this makes traversing through the levels a big headache. They all focus so much on looking grand and impressive that actually exploring these areas feels like a chore. A lot of places in Expedition 33 are way too big. Forgotten Battlefield stands out in my mind as an area that's really big with nothing of substance to back it up. It's this maze of paths in between these bodies and a bunch of enemies scattered about, but the way in which exploration in this area flows doesn't feel very thought out or, fun. Serene is also a level that suffers from this. This place is so big that it's hard to tell which way I'm supposed to be going. Everything is the same yellowish brick architecture and they're all adorned with the exact same trinkets just kind of strewn about everywhere, so there's no real visual indicator of anything. This problem extends to the world map, especially when you unlock swimming. This camera angle is horrible. It makes it hard to get a good view of the world around me, which makes exploring feel less like I'm really combing through the nooks and crannies of Lumiere, and more like I'm just stumbling on random shit that happened to be there. At least the overworld has a map, something that levels bafflingly don't have. Even a minimap would have done wonders. Hell, I would have taken a compass. I really do understand not wanting a player to be buried in the minimap when exploring, but a well-designed level should be able to circumvent this by virtue of it being fun and easy to explore. This game uses so many post-processing effects to enhance its visuals, but I feel like it often muddies the screen instead of making the game actually look better. Let's go back to the world map. It's so foggy anywhere that isn't basically immediately around you that it completely negates the very cool set piece of the giant monolith always looming in the background. Stuff like the slowdown doesn't just affect battle either, it plagues cutscenes throughout the game. Check out how long it takes for Mael to do one hit at the end of the Renor fight. 20 seconds! I thought my game was lagging or something, but no, this is just how it is. Again, I understand selling a hit, but the sense of timing here leaves it feeling hollow and awkward. It's really sad to me because there are areas of this game that look incredible. The top of the monolith was such a standout to me that in this footage I literally stand still to get a good look around because I knew I was going to be talking about it later. I really love this look they made of, paint folding in over itself and spiraling into the canvas. It's so cool. I understand why they didn't fill the game with stuff like this for plot reasons, but it feels like they never played to their strength because of it. It's just that so much of the environment is hidden behind layers upon layers of clunky design and random bloom and fog that it's really hard to feel invested in this world. Okay, clunky side tangent because I don't know where else I'm gonna fit this. Genuinely, what the fuck were they thinking with the gestural beaches? These minigames are, for lack of a better word, terrible! They're silly for a bit, but the novelty quickly wears off when I'm playing Getting Over It with Alicia Desandre for 10 minutes. Did they think their platforming was good? Why would they ever think that? Furthermore, if the point was that it felt like shit, why even put this in your game? I'm going out of my way to do this and my reward is getting my time wasted for a gag. This log minigame is borderline insulting. It literally feels like they just imported some shit from a different game and told me to get to the end as like a prank. Check out how easy it is to slip off here. This game wasn't meant for this. Making me do this while my character is at an awkward over-the-shoulder camera angle should literally warrant jail time. I don't fucking care. The race and the dodging ones aren't as bad, but putting them in this context really puts into perspective how laughably sluggish the climbing feels. Look how small I am in the climbing minigame. If this was any harder, I'd be way madder at this. Gestural volleyball is by far the worst, and it's funny because it would have been better if the game made any real attempt at visual clarity. Check out how easily the gestuals fade into the shadows on the final stage. It's half using my peripherals for the split second I can see where they're going, and half guessing and praying to any god that is willing to listen. The arc they go in is so fucking dumb. Like, what is this? Why do they linger in midair like this? This is somehow the memorization versus reaction thing again. It's the volleyball minigame. The hitbox on your attack is also just not clear, even slightly. I have no idea what miscellaneous burst of magic from my palm is actually hitting, and it's especially worse when there's such a lengthy wind-up and recovery. Gestural volleyball is a rhythm game from the depths of hell. Maybe just because they could've, doesn't mean that they should've done any of this. I've been trying to be fair and have normal, thought-out critiques this whole time, but this sucks. Never do this again, Sandfall. Expedition 33 prides itself a lot on its narrative. I'd at least hope so, because I don't think a studio that isn't extremely confident in its story would greenlight a movie before its first and only game hits store shelves. That's, of course, extremely silly when I word it like that, but this game will 100% paid off. Check any review of this game online and they'll all tell you how the writing is on another level. IGN, quote, "My heart was all in on Claire Obscure's themes of facing mortality and the different ways we handle grief." Game Informer, quote, "The setup is compelling and the execution is excellent." The New York Times, quote, "I can now add Claire Obscure Expedition 33 to the list of video games that have left me emotionally shaken when I've reached the credits." Forbes, quote, "Claire Obscure Expedition 33 is an epic work of art that allowed me to experience what may in fact be one of the best RPG storylines in genre history, possibly even in video game history." Critics on the opposite side like to call this game pretentious, and while I do think that parts of this game can be a little eye-rolly, calling something pretentious shows a lack of effort in engaging with the story on its own terms. Expedition 33 is a melodrama, and while I wasn't expecting the greatest thing in the world after the prologue, I was willing to follow the threads that it weaved throughout my playtime. Even when playing by its own rules, this tapestry comes apart almost immediately after Act 1 and spends the rest of the game trying and failing to pull itself back together. For whatever it's worth, I don't even think the first act is bad. It feels like a lot of meandering, sure, but it spends a lot of that time doing character work, which is crucial to making me care given that these people are basically the only characters in the entire game. Lune and Ciel feel one note at this point, but I was willing to chalk that up to a bit of a slow start for the characters that aren't Gustave. I actually think that he had a couple of stand-up moments here. I liked the whole fuck the mission monologue, and the bit where he yells at the giant gestural was very funny on both playthroughs. This game spends so much time lasering in on Gustave as a character that when he gets killed off by Renoir, we're left with pretty much nothing. I think it's important to dissect this scene because I truly feel that this is the moment where the game makes a mistake it never recovers from. I am not against killing off characters unceremoniously for the sake of the story. I actually really appreciate what they were going for with the death of Gustave, and I admire that they had the guts to do this. It's just that, like many other things in the game, they don't commit. I think it's important to start out with the scripted fight against Renoir before Gustave dies, because it's kind of a poster child of this game taking ideas from other things and not understanding why they worked in the source material. The fake boss fight is a trope that I love, and it's amazing when done right, it's just that this serves no purpose. For an easy example, at the end of Yakuza Like a Dragon, the game auto-reverts you to your most basic and statistically least powerful job for an extremely personal fight. It works great here because the narrative and gameplay come together to make this an amazing moment despite the fact that the fight itself is piss easy. Another example that I love is in Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim flashback right after Midgar. Sephiroth has been hyped up as this legendary soldier, and instead of just telling you more about how strong he is, they make you see it yourself. Seeing his health bar and his attack damage while you're sitting there doing nothing really does an amazing job at striking fear in your heart that you're gonna have to fight this guy later. The Renoir fight at the end of Act 1 really could have been a cutscene. What does this fight do? Establish Renoir as a threat? There's no point. The first time we saw him, he literally decapitated a dude like it was nothing. We've seen how powerful he is, and it's not like seeing his health bar not tick down strikes fear in me. In fact, this scene is made worse in retrospect when you fight him in Act 2 and he takes damage just fine. It's moments like this that make it sting even more that this is Gustave's send-off, and it doesn't sting in the way that Sandfall intended. There's a pretty telling interview by Games Radar with lead writer Jennifer Svedberg Yen, where she speaks on Gustave's death and what they were trying to accomplish.
It's also so that the player can experience what grief feels like in this world, and to really feel the words of, for those who come after, and when one falls, we continue, because that is literally what we're asking the player to do. When one falls, Gustave is gone. How do you continue?
I actually really like the philosophy that she explains here. I would have loved the Expedition 33 that truly asks me how I continue, but that's just not the game they made. There is no how do we continue because it gets answered immediately after the cutscene is over. There's not a single moment of gameplay between the point of view switching from Gustave to Verso. By my count, it was about 8 minutes. I never truly felt the loss of Gustave because this new guy showed up and inherited all of his weapons, so I guess I didn't really lose anything, did I? What's worse is that now, as the player, I don't have a foothold in the story anymore. The character who we spent all of Act 1 fleshing out gets swapped out with some guy I don't know, and now I'm left with 3 characters I don't really know, and 1 Mael who will proceed to get shafted in favor of Verso until Act 3. I'm suddenly playing as a guy who already knows everything and is stringing everyone along, and while an unreliable narrator isn't anything new, I feel as if I've lost all agency in the story. It's Verso's world now, and I have to pretend like I care until anyone explains what's going on. I can't truly talk about Verso and why he baffles me so much without getting deep into Act 3, so before I do, I want to talk about the other 2 girls in the party, Lune and Ciel. Despite being the other 2 people in the entire game, barring Gustave, Monaco, Verso, and Mael, they are essentially static characters. Lune and Ciel do not change at all throughout the course of Expedition 33, and if I'm being honest, don't really matter to the story. Lune's one and only character trait is that she's driven to finish the mission. She's cold, she's calculating, but that's literally it. I thought that given the whole fuck the mission scene, she'd have an arc about, like, you know, fucking the mission, for lack of a better term, but no. She's so completely bound to the protocol of the expedition that when they succeed, she has a moment where she doesn't know what to do, but it's not expanded on at all because the world ends and Act 3 starts. She is literally so insignificant that she has a couple moments where she finds out Verso has been deliberately keeping information from them, but instead of getting rightfully pissed off and having a lasting impact on the dynamic of the story, she yells at him for one cutscene and everyone moves on. This happens twice. CL is kind of the opposite, being warmer and definitely a lot flirtier for some reason, but that's literally it. Her whole deal is being very at peace with the idea of death and the fact that they might fail the mission, but these thoughts never play a role in literally anything she does. The first time we see her at the docks in the prologue, she's like 7 bottles of wine deep, and when we see her again with the Gestrel, she's showboating and using playing cards in her moveset. To me, this screamed that she was going to be a very reckless and hot-headed character to contrast Lune's cold and calculating demeanor, but nothing even close to this ended up being the case. I was really hoping that in the background of Verso and Mael's main plot we could have had Lune and CL's ideologies clash, but frankly neither of them have enough of a personality for this to have even been that interesting. There are 2 cutscenes I can think of where they both get a moment to hang out, but they're just, like, fucking boring. They both feel like Sandfall realized they probably should have a moment for these 2 to bond, but didn't really have any ideas, so they just talk about death again. Isn't it crazy how our parents are dead? Yeah, but it's even cooler that we're friends. Like, okay. It really does get to a point where they could be swapped out for each other and a lot of scenes wouldn't change. There's a moment near the end of Forgotten Battlefield where CL reminds a grieving Mael about the whole when one falls we continue thing, and it's like, what? Shouldn't Lune be doing this? I get that CL's whole thing is also accepting death, but either character could have delivered these lines and it literally wouldn't have mattered. Their only real, tangible contributions to the story are Lune and CL dealing the final blows on Serene and Visages respectively, but like, honestly, their roles could have been swapped out here as well. CL kills Visages because the idea is that she doesn't hide behind a mask and is her authentic self, but it's not like Lune really hides behind a mask either. Verso and Mael, sure, even if it's unknowingly for the latter, but Lune isn't masking anything. Maybe if she did, she'd be a more interesting character, Honk's clown nose. In fact, I'd argue CL is the one masking her pain of losing people, but fucking, whatever. Lune deals the final blow on Serene because she's too focused on the mission to dwell in the past. But forgive me if I'm wrong, this is also CL's only character trait. Her whole thing is being at ease with death and losing people. While it makes sense that Mael and Verso are distracted by visions of their past, I don't really see why CL would be so easy to trick with this. It's frustrating to have these characters take such an enormous backseat to Mael and Verso when they have interesting setups. They just don't do anything with them. I honestly rather that they try and whiff on their arcs instead of literally just wasting them both like this. On the other hand, I like Monaco. He's funny. He's like the only character I like. I know he's like arguably more static, but I thought it was funny when he talked, so. Now, in tandem with Verso, it's time to talk about the bigger picture. Verso is a very strange character to have the players control because he knows everything. He knows the world is a painting, and every action he takes is just getting everyone closer to destroying the canvas. It's just the fact that he strong-arms the plot so hard, no one gets any room to breathe after he joins. He leads everyone to Forgotten Battlefield on top of already knowing a perfect spot to bury Gustave's arm. He leads them to Old Lumiere because he knows that's where the manor is, and even when that fails, he of course already knows about the 2 axons, how to break the barrier to the monolith, and even some extra manpower to top it off. He acts like a tour guide. Even when characters are understandably weary or suspicious of him, no one really says anything or just gloss over it. By the time I got to the top of the monolith and I was watching Renor and Verso talk about some shit I didn't know the context for yet, I felt like I was watching the second half of a movie. And when the game finally shows me the first half, I'm almost too taken aback to care. Act 3 is when the game fully shows its hand and reveals everything. The Lumiere the entire game has been taking place in is a world in a painting. Mael is actually Alicia in the real world and Verso is her brother that died in a fire. Now, I don't think using art as a way to showcase how real people deal with grief is bad at all. This is a fine metaphor about losing grip on the reality of a situation through escapism and never moving on from the death of a loved one. This entire game is about death and what comes with that, so I think this works well on paper. It kind of falls apart entirely when the game asks you to accept that this isn't a metaphor and that the painters are actually just magic people. They're literally Mario 64 going into painting world to see Verso again. A part of Verso's soul being trapped in the canvas isn't fancy language for how art is always a reflection of the artist. He's literally trapped in there. What? What the fuck are you talking about? I don't want to say that this is as bad as in, and it was all a dream plot twist because there is obviously more going on here. Even though Maëlle is Alicia in the real world, the 16 years that she spent trapped in Painted Lumiere were sort of real in a hyperbolic time chamber way. The game does try to beat you over the head with the fact that the painted characters should be treated like they're real people. The problem here is that I don't agree with this at all. Fiction and art are very important to people. Only a fool would say otherwise. But I don't treat fictional people like they're real. At the end of the day, Alicia is the real person and everyone else is in a painting. Being able to jump into the painted world doesn't make Alicia any less real. The duality of the worlds that the game presents here is a total false equivalence. It's because of this that on a second playthrough, For Those Who Come After rings completely hollow. There is no For Those Who Come After. There was no For Those Who Come After. Hell, there might as well not have been those who came before. The only reason Expedition 33 succeeded was because both Verso and Maëlle were there, so the Desandre family was able to have a little powwow when plot happened. Gustave's sacrifice? Even worse than previously thought. Luna and Ciel? At least they have a reason to be one note. Monaco? I don't know, he's a dog. I actually like him. I say that they're the only expedition that succeeded, but there was another one. Expedition 60. The shitty joke one. Near the end of the game, you can find the Journal of Expedition 60, an expedition that through training and bodybuilding made their way to the monolith without clothes. And while I personally don't find this gag that funny to begin with, it becomes insulting when they literally discover the truth of the painters and try to warn the mainland about it. What? Talk about downplaying sacrifices. When you make the joke expedition the one that can light a candle to the one with insane plot armor, it really dilutes the whole For Those Who Come After thing. When the game starts wrapping up and it makes you choose between staying in or destroying the painting, it falls flat because, I cannot stress this enough, the people in the painting aren't real. In that same interview I brought up earlier with Svetberg Yen, she gets asked which ending is better, and she says this in response.
They are meant to be understood together, right? And that's why we actually made it the way it was. So the two actually need to be understood and experienced in tandem with each other. They are a contrast. They are a pair. And they are the two sides of the same coin, the recto verso, if you will. And the question we want to ask is, in the end, whose happiness do we prioritize? And when we pursue happiness for somebody, what is the cost? And do we fully consider the cost to the other folks, the other characters?
I understand having these endings be a package deal. On the surface, I think it makes sense. They both work well together thematically, with one having Alicia come to grasp the reality of the situation and the other having Maëlle live happily ever after in her fantasy world. The problem is that here, she's posing these endings as if they're equal, which frankly, I think is dangerous. I don't think burying yourself deeper in fantasy to not deal with the death of a loved one is good, actually. I think that's bad. I don't need to explain to you why that's bad. These are two sides of the same coin, sure, but when the game spends the entire runtime betting on heads, it's kind of insane to insinuate that Tails is a-okay too. I just think this game had a lot of potential to talk about grief and nihilism and how this all comes together to form hope in a world always filled with death and blah blah blah, but it completely drops the ball once the entire game becomes about Verso and his little issues. What does the end of the game say, really? That you should move on when someone dies? Why didn't I think of that? That would have been really handy to know the last 2 times this already happened. The way Expedition 33 had so much going for it and delivered on basically none of it is really sad to me. I wanted to root for this game, I really did, but every time I was getting invested, it kept doing some new thing that to me was jaw-droppingly stupid. Even the prose this game speaks in pisses me off. I still think about Visages being referred to as he who guards truth with lies. Yeah, of course the lie guards the truth. That's what a lie does! Back to front, this game was such a mediocre experience that I wouldn't have even thought about it 3 days after I beat it if it wasn't treated like the best game ever made. So, once again, I sit here asking myself, how did this game even get so popular? I cannot stress enough that I played this game because of the praise that it got. Had it not swept the Game Awards, I probably would have seen it on Steam, looked at the screenshots, decided the style threw me off, and moved on. I also cannot stress enough that I love games with turn-based combat. I played Earthbound when I was like 10, and I got permanently changed by it, and had it not been for the chokehold Mugenics still has on me, I probably would have finished this video a lot sooner. So when I sunk my teeth into Expedition 33 and tasted a very mediocre derivative mess, I felt like I was losing my fucking mind. Revolutionized the genre, I've seen this before. This sentiment truly drove me up the wall, because to me, it seemed that people were giving this game credit for repeating a joke louder and worse. Where have you guys been? I played a significantly better game than this not even a full year ago. It's like there was a mass mind wipe event that made everyone forget every turn-based RPG that has ever come out since Final Fantasy VII, excluding, of course, the People's Champ from 2017. I watched a lot of videos in preparation for this just to see what people actually liked about this game, and they were all parroting pretty similar ideas.
I really think this is the best turn-based system. Like, in this genre, I really think this is the absolute cream of the crop. And it is one of the most visually impressive games I've ever seen. The art design, like the direction, oh my god. It is fucking cinema. Like, absolute peak. The cutscenes are hype.
It's just that every time I try to get into a JRPG, it's either too slow to start or just has one too many anime-isms for me. But Expedition 33 just gets it. This game's turn-based combat is revolutionary. Look, the reality is a lot of turn-based games become very unengaging very quickly. You get the moves and items you like, and it's basically hitting the same button for 20 hours with maybe a change in strategy, or it's just RNG hell disguised as difficulty.
And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this game has made pretty much every other JRPG or turn-based RPG that I've played feel completely boring and static when it comes to combat. I'm not usually the type of person that gets super invested in a game's story or really cares, to be honest. But honestly, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time I was playing this.
Now, it's not like people on YouTube are the paragons of game analysis or anything. Honk honk. But it's not like these people don't exist. The numbers speak for themselves. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has currently sold over 5 million copies, while Atlus's Metaphor Refantasio, the 2024 winner for RPG of the Year at the Game Awards, sold less than half. How does something like this even happen? Metaphor isn't part of a franchise and reviewed very similarly to Expedition 33 across major outlets. In fact, in theory, it should be the other way around given that Atlus is a massively popular developer. Unfortunately, I think the answer lies in the history of the genre. What even is a JRPG anyway? Why do we call it that? Genre names are often vague and ill-defined, which is its own can of worms, but it's the only name for a game genre I can think of that's rooted in a country of origin. I guess it makes sense on the surface, a lot of things defined as a JRPG are turn-based, story-driven games, but it gets messier and messier the further I look into it. There's a pretty famous interview by the online publication SkillUp with Naoki Yoshida, longtime developer at Square Enix and current director of... hold on, I'm gonna butcher this. Final Fantasy X1V, whatever the fuck that is. He explains in this interview that even though he understands where the term came from, quote, the first time we heard it, it was like a discriminatory term, as though we were being made fun of for creating these games. He continued, quote, traveling around the world speaking with fans, they would give the same answer, that it's turn-based, that it's anime-like, these teenagers saving the world. This was turning off some players, and that was the reason not to get into it. He says that while the term doesn't bother him anymore, it certainly did at one point, and while I don't think anyone who uses this is ill-willed or god forbid racist, I don't think the stigma ever left. The term JRPG creates a culture in which gamers are more comfortable dismissing an entire genre when it doesn't conform to what they're used to, just based on the image they have already formed in their mind because of Japanese culture stereotypes. It's not like we specify Fallout as an ARPG or Cyberpunk as a PRPG, and I've never in my life seen anyone describe the games made by FromSoft as a JRPG despite the fact that they are obviously grilled. Why are Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, and Dragon Quest all labeled under the same genre? The answer is that they're technically not. They're tactical, action, and turn-based respectively, but simply due to their country of origin, they all have an umbrella they can be shoved under. I do want to make it clear that I of course think Japan's culture is very different, and because games are art, they often reflect different things than those made in the States or in Europe. I also want to say that I don't think Japanese culture is like superior or anything. I have my problems with it like I do the culture of the States, especially regarding sex, gender, and race. But I can't pretend like I don't see the stigma that things made in Japan are constantly hit with. Because this concept of the East is seen as alien and fantastical, it leads to a lot of generalizations being made about its cultural exports, and it makes a lot of people rob themselves of some truly stellar experiences. Growing up, I've always seen the turn-based RPG be at the receiving end of, I don't really like those games, sorry, from people who haven't given it a proper shot, but I think with this I finally understand why. This type of game was born and is still primarily made in Japan, and I can't help but feel that these two dots are connected. Expedition 33 isn't doing anything new, but it's being praised as the revolution this slow, stale genre needed because seemingly no one knows that we're long past this. I seriously can't help but attribute this to the fact that the game's main aesthetics are unmistakably French. The broken Eiffel Tower, the mimes, the title theme, the names of the characters, the baguette outfits they all wore to the Game Awards. This game's identity online is that one French RPG. It accidentally puts a very mainstream, palatable face on a genre that is historically populated by a more marginalized group, and that's how it got so popular. Unfortunately, conventionally handsome white man with a white streak in his hair and other conventionally handsome white man is a significantly easier pill to swallow than anything anime adjacent for a lot of people because the stigmas against Japanese culture are still running rampant in the gaming scene. To be clear, I don't think Sandfall did this on purpose. They're fans, and they just wanted to make a game based on the things that they loved. Personally, I'll be keeping an eye on whatever Sandfall puts out next because I do think they have potential to make something great, but given the reception of Expedition 33, I'm not holding my breath that they won't double down and fall into the same pits. I just think it's a shame that this is what's seen as the future of the genre when I hope Sandfall learns from their mistakes they made here. I like playing good games, and I like seeing people play these good games, but if this is what's going to define the genre for the near future, it's gonna be a rough period of people wanting every RPG that comes out to be the next Expedition 33. For those who come after or whatever. I don't hate this game. I never did. There's a handful of things I genuinely like in here. They're just, buried under a mountain of things that I don't. I think it just makes me upset to see people not know what they're missing out on. I'm a big proponent of games being art, and while I understand not everyone can spend their entire life playing video games, like me, I feel like the reputation of what is known as the JRPG comes from a lack of respect for the medium that I find unfair. If you liked Expedition 33, please treat yourself to some of these games. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I already covered why I enjoy the combat more, but I still adore this game's cast. Goombella, Vivian, Admiral Bobbery, these characters will live in my heart for a very long time. This game really is a joy, and I really think most, if not everyone, should experience it. Yakuza Like a Dragon is a bit of a clunky game in battle, but it really is one of the best stories I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing in an RPG. It fills me with the hope that I was hoping, Expedition 33 would, and the end of the game never fails to put tears in my eyes. I'd also recommend Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth for some actually innovating gameplay. Its take on a classic Final Fantasy job system is very fresh, and the spatial awareness required to optimize damage really makes each turn that much more engaging. The story's significantly worse, and I'd really recommend playing the rest of the Yakuza series before Infinite Wealth, but I really loved my time with the game. It's really a shame that that's the last Yakuza game they made. It's really a shame. Don't look into it. It's a shame. Last on the docket is Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I think it does a very good job giving all 6 of the main characters the spotlight while also having the best combat of the Xenoblades. It's complex, but this game's tutorialization is honestly so simple and great that I never felt like I was overwhelmed by my options in battle. The main plot is honestly not too dissimilar from the themes of Expedition 33, and I had a very fun time throughout. It made me care about Hetzlop 3 times. That's crazy. Other than that, if I had it my way, Game of the Year in 2025 would be Split Fiction, I guess. I thought all the level gimmicks were super fun, even though I think the environments were kinda boring and the art, wasn't doing anything for me. I think it's a great game, but I think I just liked the person I was playing it more, so a lot of people were mad it wasn't Silksong. Sorry, is this a bad time to say that I actually didn't like Hollow Knight? Or like snore obscure.
That was bad. Don't put that in the video.